So why am I here? What am I doing here? My name is John Hammock, and I'm actually I'm a former software engineer. I tell everyone that I'm a recovering engineer. I started my career a long time ago at F-Secure company in Finland, and then in the early 2000s I moved over to Tallinn, Estonia, and I was working for Skype. And although my work has I've never been a UI or a UX designer as such. One of the biggest, sort of my proudest accomplishments in my days over in Eastern Europe and actually traveling the world with Skype was building a UX certification program around all of the 1,600 or so devices that we had integrating with the Skype ecosystem circa 2005, 2006. So it's been a little while, and it's been a bumpy road for me. Since then I've been a software engineer over at Nokia. I moved back to the States. I'm from the States originally. I moved back here in 2011, and I started to discover that much better than being a software engineer, I'm an artist. I'm a digital artist, and started to pick up some exhibitions and get some general interest in things. And just when I was thinking about exiting this whole software thing altogether, I got a call from Mozilla, and they wanted me to come down and work with them on Firefox OS, and this was in 2011. And I started to work with these web APIs, and then I started to work actually QA and a bit of evangelism and a teeny little bit of UX for Firefox OS. And I was hoping that Sasha wasn't going to blow my cover because I'm talking about Android today. But as it turns out, a lot of Firefox OS is actually built on Android. I mean, we're using the same Android debug bridge to debug the things. We're using the same, a lot of parts of the same kernel and so forth. So it wasn't that much of sort of a leap to go from, for example, Firefox OS to Android. But when I started to get serious about doing the art thing, I realized that if I want to eat, I need somebody to buy this stuff, right? And so what I started to do is I started to approach like app developers and app designers to sort of present as, hey, we could make some great textures for you. We could make some great iconography for you that you've never done. And so starting to approach the market in this way, I realized that there was this enormous gap between the understanding of designers and developers. They simply weren't speaking the same language. And in a lot of companies that I went to, both before I started this push as an artist, approaching companies, and then after, I discovered that developers and designers weren't even using the same language when they talked about things. Whereas Android developers were talking about activities, designers were talking about screens and so forth. I don't know what your experience is, but we discovered that there was enough of a gap that the guys at New Circle approached me. I guess this must have been after Sasha defected, and said, let's build a course around it. Of course they're going to say that. They build courses around everything, right? So here I am building a course, and what I'm going to give you today is part of the first module where we're talking about UI design principles and resources of Android. And then we're going to dig down a little bit, and we're going to look at some anti-patterns as well. And an anti-pattern is, whereas a pattern is something that you want to be able to accomplish with a design, an anti-pattern is precisely something that you don't want to accomplish. And I'm not too heavy on the demos, but I have one short demo that we're gonna look at briefly. And I'd like to get you guys involved as well, but let's see how we do in terms of time and people falling asleep in their chairs. So let's talk a little bit about the creative vision. We'll talk a little bit about Google's creative vision. We'll talk a little bit about the design principles. And then I'm going to give you some examples of anti-patterns. So let's just jump right in here. So what is Android creative vision? I hope it's not showing on my screen there, but if it is, can somebody tell me what it is, please? It boils down to 3 points. They are: simplify my life, make me amazing. There we go. Okay, so, I mean, this is all kind of fuzzy stuff, and it's not as straightforward as teaching code, right? Because what the heck does all this mean, right? Well, obviously, one very important thing to keep in mind is that this really is about emotion. And that's why they're kind of referring to it in the nature of the first person. You see, when I experience something on my phone, my experience is indivisible from my experience in real life. That's why there's been a big shift going from UI to UX, user interface as opposed to user experience. Think about it. If you're talking about UI, you may be talking about the screens, or in the case of Android, you may be talking about the way the activities are laid out on your device. When you're talking about UX, you're talking about the whole experience. So if I have a pizza ordering app, for example, then everything from whipping out my phone to launching the pizza app to getting to the first screen where I'm selecting orders to making the payment to clicking send to getting the pizza delivered in a timely way and hopefully enjoying the pizza if it's not complete crap, then that is the whole experience. We're talking about the entire experience. So it's not just the quality of the user interface, but it's the experience, of which the UI is part of it, right? And so the creative vision is actually going to that level. It's going to that level of, I don't want to say abstraction, but it's talking about the entirety of the experience. This, incidentally, is something that I tried to achieve also when I was developing the UX certification program at Skype. I wanted to talk about the entire experience. And it seems like a few years later, I mean, I guess they already got it, but they're really getting it now because we're starting to see Android apps coming together and becoming more and more tight of an experience. Although there are some real stinkers out there, and we're gonna talk about a few. We know that the experience of people is shaped by emotions. So if I have a bad day, and you have a good day, and we walk together and we encounter the same experience, for example, at a restaurant in town here, it's more likely that I'm going to see that experience, which is completely unrelated, as a bad experience, whereas the person who's walking with me who's had a good day is going to see that as a good experience. So experience of people is shaped by emotion. What we also know is that, and what they found in their Android research, is that it takes 3 positive experiences to offset a single negative experience. So when I have 1 bad experience in my app, it's going to take me 3 good experiences to even break even. And you can kind of look into the research there. There's a big reference to it at Google I/O 2013. We can look at that video later if you want. Consider also the emotional attachment that people have to Apple. I mean, Steve Jobs is one of those guys who sort of understood the notion of experience and the totality of experience. And he was obviously very aggressive toward his team about not shipping products with even the most niggling or seemingly trivial of bugs, whereas a lot of marketing managers would just say, oh, it's good enough, ship it. God knows I've seen that enough. Steve Jobs was, one of those people who was perfectionist, not just to the point of the product, but to the point of the products that the experience embodied, that he was aiming for that. And arguably, to a variable degree, he certainly achieved that. So let's look at the actual principles here. What does it mean? So did I get the right thing here? I actually teach right off the page in my class. I hope you don't mind. So the Android design principles. Enchant me. Let me hear it. Delight me in surprising ways. What are the other ones, please?
Make it simple.
Well, okay.
Real objects are more fun than buttons and menus.
Right. Let me make it mine. So people love to, add personal touches. They love to customize things. They love to take something out of the box and make it theirs. Get to know me is another one of these main principles. And this is all about learning what my preferences are, learning how I use the device, and kind of like a good servant would. You don't make those options automatic, but you present them to me in a simple and easy enough way to get. Simplify my life. So, for any words, you keep it brief. Pictures are faster than words. Decide for me, but let me have the final say. Note the example that they have here. This is an example of Android Beam, which is a version of NFC. So when I hold two phones together, I'm automatically presented with this option of, do you want to beam this picture? It's not done for me, because that would be a bad thing. Imagine if I was in a subway and I brush up against somebody and then I pocket beam all my dirty photos to this other person. I mean, that would be a bad, although it would be sort of amusing if it happened the other way, right? But they're deciding for me, but they're letting me have the final say as to what I want. Another big part of it is keeping it kind of simple, right? So only show what I need when I need it, right? So here we have the Google Play Store, and we have and of course, they've popped up the overflow menu to kind of show an example. Presumably, in this main activity, let's pretend that this overflow menu is not there. It hasn't been activated yet. In that main activity, it's going to show you all of the most important things that I can do with that app in that activity, right? You know, by activity, you know that I'm talking about the app screen, basically, right? If I need to do more things that are less, or different things that are, for example, less important to the app but still need to be done, then I call this overflow menu, right? And this is a way of not giving me too much information to process at once, giving me what I need when I need it. So, related to that, I should always know where I am. So if I'm navigating an app, if I have an email app, and I open the email app and I have an index of mails there, I should know that if I click one of those mails in the index, that I'm going to be taken to a detailed view of that email, perhaps with the contents of the message. I can click or tap somewhere else in there, and I'm brought to a place where I can do things like reply and forward the email and so forth. And I know that if I hit this thing that looks like a funny-looking arrow there, then I'm going to be taken back up to the next highest activity. And this should work kind of universally across the board. I should always know where I am. And the surprising thing is, it's gotten a lot better in the application landscape lately, but it's surprisingly still how many people get this wrong when they develop apps. Obviously, never lose my stuff, right? So if I took time to create settings, if I took time to make personal touches, I want to be able to save that stuff. If possible, I want to be able to duplicate it across all of my devices, right? Related to I should always know where I am is obviously if it looks the same, it should act the same. Notice that those spinner buttons are all the same in all three cases. What some application developers do wrong is they will use certain iconography in ways that it isn't used universally. So when, for example, I've seen this in some banking apps, I remember I was using one banking app, I'm not going to say which one, and I hit something that looked like a spinner and it did something completely different. And then I found myself in a place in the app where I didn't actually know where I was. So it broke two of these principles, and you remember the 3-to-1 rule. Now I had 6 points going against me, and I needed to make at least that many good things about the app, which of course never happened, right, to break even. So only interrupt me if it's important. So be very careful about knowing what kind of notifications your application is sending and when it's sending them. I don't want to break the flow of my concentration because I've already invested like a certain amount of time and energy into getting to know this app and getting to know how it flows from where I'm started to where my goal is in the app. If I break my concentration, then I'm losing that investment in time and I have to invest the time again to get back in the flow of the app. So it's very important. And obviously, if you break the concentration on another app or another person, another thing that somebody's doing, then you're committing even cardinal sin because you're kind of infringing on somebody else there, right? So, make me amazing. Anybody want to call these things out for me? Because I'm feeling kind of lazy and my jaw hurts. So make me amazing. What's the first one? And you got to know these, so because there's going to be a question on them later, apparently. Sasha made me do it. So make me amazing. Give me tricks that work everywhere. Wake up.
It's not my fault.
It's not your fault. It's not my fault either, man. Don't blame it on me. It's not my fault means it's we want to be gentle in how we're prompting people to make corrections or how to do things. If something's not obvious and we need text to explain it, we want to do this in a way where people don't feel like they're being blamed or accused. We don't want to make them feel stupid because that's not a good thing, right? What is the next one? And what does that mean? How do you interpret that directive? Sprinkle encouragement. Well, if I have a very complicated task, I want to break it down into simple tasks. And I want to provide some positive reinforcement along the way. And the positive reinforcement could be something as simple as showing a simple glow around a button when I press that button. Does that make sense? So I know that the button is pressed, so I'm not sitting there like, why isn't this doing anything? Right? Do the heavy lifting for me. Sorry, I was going to have you do it, but I did it anyway. Yeah, so there. If I want to make you feel like an expert, I want to make you feel amazing, I want to be able to do things to empower you to do things that you didn't know were possible before. When you consider all of the possible photo effects that there are, I mean everything from tinting and shading to sepia tones to blur effects and all of these different things you can do with photos, it gets pretty confusing, right? But you know that every photographer, or at least most photographers out there, are working within a certain bucket of tricks and coming up with a certain range of effects. I mean, all you need to do is look at most amateur photographers' Facebook posts to know that they do a lot of the same stuff. So why not combine all these effects to one instead of making them kind of figure out everything? And last but not least, we want to make important things fast. I know I said I was going to have you do this, but I'm getting into it now. And a camera, what is the most important control to have on the main activity? It's a shutter button, right? That's the most important thing, taking a picture. So on the main activity of a camera, and to get a sense of how these things are embodied, you can just look at most of the Google stock apps because most, if not all of them, embody these principles. But I mean, on the main activity, the main thing, front and center, is the shutter button, right? Does that make sense? And there really isn't a whole lot else there. So, what I usually do at this point is I kick it around, I kick it back to the audience and sort of ask you guys about your good experiences and your bad experiences and your ugly experiences. What I actually do is I have my students form up little teams, but I don't think we're going to do that tonight. But they form up little teams, and instructor gives them an app to explore, and I have this whole list of apps here. And then they kind of go through the apps and they say, well, what are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? And they kind of come up with a point system. But I thought we would just jump right into the anti-patterns, if that's okay. How are we doing on time, by the way? We doing good? So, this is still, I'm sorry, I should put this in present mode. One of the biggest anti-patterns that I see in an app. And why would having an EOLA up front be an anti-pattern? Can anyone offer me some insight into that?
Make them do work.
Right, it makes us do work without any kind of rewarding. But a EULA is necessary, right? I mean, we're going to engage in some kind of a legal relationship with whoever made this app. So we have to have it, don't we? Or do we?
We'll have to look around first, and then if they want to make a user account, then you can present them with that.
Exactly. So she said to allow people to look around first and then execute the EULA later. Another way to sort of correct this anti-pattern, I mean, if it's, for example, the kind of thing that shows up in a banking app, I mean, you're going to negotiate your relationship with the bank up front when you open the account, right? Why not sign the EULA then? If not then, why not do it, for example, at a desktop computer? But don't make the person, do it when they're running around with a mobile device trying to get on the subway, because that's ridiculously absurd. And how are people going to be able to do this? You can always, with the application, you can always detect the state of the EULA when you open the app, and you can keep the welcome mat open, right? Let people explore and see what's possible to do, and then jump to this thing later. So another anti-pattern, I call it the contact us anti-pattern. And the situation is you're trying out an application, you're banging around, and you run into some inevitable problem with this where you need to get help. And what you're presented with is like some untappable phone number, right? So you actually need to put your phone down and write down this phone number if you're going to call, because you're not going to remember it between the time you go between the application and the dialer, right? Or else there's going to be some long contact form without any kind of preset. So you're expected to do some work. And actually, when a customer is using your app and they're using the help app, do you realize that they're actually helping you, the developer? Because they're giving you feedback. They're saying, I'm running into a problem here. So what you're actually making the customer do is work even harder to give you feedback. I mean, how fair is that? I would say not very. So if your customers are already flustered, there's a good chance they're gonna say to heck with it. So, I mean, the obvious antidote to that is to have like a tappable number and some kind of presets. Another anti-pattern, it's kind of related to the EULA one, is I call it sign up or sign in. And this is where, again, almost every banking app ever created does this. Before you can even start, you have to go through sometimes in addition to an EULA, you have to go through a lengthy and confusing sign up or login. And there's a way around that. In some cases, you can enable a session token or a guest account. And like she was saying, what's your name again?
Catherine.
Like Catherine was saying here in the front row, you can allow people to look around and to use some limited functionality of your app before you give them the burden of EULAs if you haven't done it already, and before you expect them to sign in. I mean, there's certain things you can do. Even if you're a banking app, you can show certain things up front, like we have this great service and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, they have to log in and have some kind of acceptable security if it's really dealing with the account stuff. But there's certain ways you can engage people before expecting them to do this all up front. So I'm going to show you one example of an anti-pattern that I kind of ran into. If I can get my Droided screen to work here. So when I decided that I didn't want to be a software engineer anymore, and when I quit my job in May, I went back to one of my old loves and I joined a band. And the band was touring and we were playing a lot of the wharfs around here on San Francisco. And let's see if my Droided app actually works. Oh yes, it's asking me for permission. So let's go to the Play Store. And when you're traveling around, oh yeah, wonderful. This is a great, it's kind of a shitty example, but this is the kind of thing you need when you're traveling around with a band. I think we need to turn it upside down. And it rotates in exactly the wrong position. Oh, hey, that works. Thanks for the tip, Willie. When you're traveling around and you're playing outside for 14 hours a day with a band, 10 to 14 hours a day, I mean, and you're in weird cities like Seattle or San Francisco, you obviously need to know where the bathroom is. So you go and you install this app, And what is the first thing going to do? So you're kind of jumping around wondering like, okay, how is this going to work out? And the very first thing the app asks you to do is your birthday. So I don't even know who these people are, and they want to know my birthday. All right? I mean, what the heck for? This is obviously some kind of marketing thing, right? So I'm going to make some, I'm not really that old, I'm older. So we're going to do this. And then, I'm not kidding, look at this. This is what you get when you try. So you're looking for bathrooms, right? And you have to, okay, right, whatever, I accept. Oh, come on. It gives me this message here. So they actually expect me, before I look for the bathroom, to like read and agree to all of this stuff. Hold harmless and indemnity. Okay, what am I going to sue you for? I mean, come on, right? This is just ridiculous. I mean, now it used to show you, there's another screen to tap before it actually gets you to the good stuff. And I don't know if it's going to do, but what it usually does here is it shows you a map of like where all the public restrooms are. And it's a crowdsourced thing, so like once you log in, you can add bathrooms to it, and it's handy. But if I hadn't gone through all that and I hadn't tapped through this extra screen, I would have never gotten the usefulness out of this app. And I would have wasted a lot of time, and who knows what else would have happened, right? So these are an example of some of the kind of anti-patterns that we see. And I'm going to go through just a few more of these. So another anti-pattern, I call it the extra page tutorials. And this is if you're going through something like a game or you're going through the flow of an application. Obviously, presenting the information in a reasonable and timely way is something that's very important. But what's problematic is when you get an extra page, it's actually out of sync with the application flow for your help text, right? And some games, and the reason this is a problem, obviously, is because it's breaking the natural flow of your application. So I'm going through your app, I'm playing a game, I'm getting signed up, I'm doing all of these other things. And then right in the middle there is a big chunk of information that I need to somehow memorize and know later. And there's an interesting way to work around this. And that's what some game series do. For example, in the Gameloft series, and I should say that, by the way, some of these examples, I'm not getting these all out of my head. I'm getting some of these from this wonderful Android Design Patterns book by Greg Noodleman. If you guys, any of you guys familiar with this book? Or any of you guys Greg Noodleman?
He spoke at our video last year.
Oh, did he? Yeah, I've seen him speak. So yeah, I'm but a pale imitation of Mr. Noodleman, but anyway. This is a great book, and he's got a lot of good examples, and a lot of examples that come out of these examples, too. But what he pointed out here is that in the Nova series by Gameloft, that you have an AI assistant who asks you to check your guidance systems before you're starting the game. And this actually gives you a chance to try out all of the game moves and various things before you start the game. And it's more or less in real time, right? So if at any point in certain games you can bring up a contextual dialogue, a contextual interactive thing where you're actually, again, learning what you need to do. And if I'm not mistaken, Lumosity does this too. They have the same kind of pattern. So you might be trying some of the drills and you forget what you're supposed to do, and it's very easy to find the help there. But what they don't do is they give you some page of text that's out of sync with the rest of the application, that you're supposed to memorize that information and carry it with you to the place in the application where you actually use it. So the next couple of anti-patterns I have are related to search and refinement. So one of the problems you have is when you're searching, and I know Amazon used to do this. There's another app out there that I need to try. It's called the Find. And this is where you have a separate page for search and another page for refinement. So imagine if you're doing a search and you have one page with a whole bunch of blank space on it that could be used constructively, but one page, one search control. You type in your search query, And then you go to another page to refine the search. Well, and then you get your sorted results or your filtered results. And then you discover that, well, the thing I'm looking for isn't in these results. So I need to go back. Click, click. I'm tapping twice to go back. And I change my search term again. And then I tap next. And then there's another place to refine my search again. And I go back and forth. Obviously, doing this enough time is forcing me to lose my stream of thought and my concentration. And it results in another anti-pattern, which Greg Noodleman refers to as pogo stick, and we're actually jumping back and forth between controls. Another one he called is crippled refinement, and this is where you have search options that are basically dumbed down or simplified versions of web equivalents. I mean, if I have a web application, and I know Amazon, again, used to do this. If I have a web version of Amazon and I get all of these different search criteria that I can use, and then I have a mobile version and I have only a limited set of those, it sort of starts to beg the question, what use is this mobile app? I mean, why don't I just wait to get to the web version of it? Again, this is the kind of thing that can result in pogo sticking, because now that I have a limited range of things to choose from here, I may need to go back to the beginning, change my search query again with these dumbed down equivalents, or else go back and forth between the mobile app and the web app. And then what's the point, right? What's the point of having the mobile app at all? Why don't I just do everything in the web app? And obviously the last sort of anti-pattern I have, and the thing that I want to close you with, is the whole thing of pogo sticking. And this is where I'm jumping back and forth between pages to achieve a goal. In the old version of TripAdvisor, they used to do this. So I open my TripAdvisor and I have a list of basically trips. But there's not enough information on that main activity under each trip to tell me enough to make a decision. So I need to drill down, look at that thing in detail, get the information I need, and then go back one level up in the application to actually make my choice. And then maybe I've forgotten what I just saw in the detailed view, so I need to go back down to the detail again, or maybe I need to do this several times for several different options. And you can see how that just blows your concentration all to hell. So that's kind of what I have on UI design and what I have on anti-patterns right now. Normally when I do this with a class, it's a bit more interactive because I have a bunch of students that I can make do things, whereas I don't have all of you. Do you have any questions for me or anything you want to ask me right now? Before I ask you the final question that's going to win you a seat at the, what con was it again, Sasha? NDevCon, yes. So, what questions do you have for me?
So, like if somebody, like, you know.
I've heard that also. I've heard that sort of brought up in addressing the anti-pattern, like why they do it. What they're actually able to do is not just make fewer choices, but make smarter ones, right? So your search criteria, and then those search criteria actually become the criteria in the real app as well, because they're smarter ones. So they're not just knocking options away, but they're making smarter ones that maybe cover some of the other possibilities there are. So that's one way to address it. I think when we were talking about the anti-pattern here, they were just taking options away. So. And I guess that's what you have to do when you're on a time, limited time and limited budget anyway, so who knows. Thank you for having me today. I'm still learning my way through this, and it's a very exciting journey, and I'm learning so much from giving talks like these, so thank you.